In Sacramento County, a man bought a quiet home with a long history behind it. But when he stepped into the old outbuilding on the property, he didn't just uncover dusty tools or forgotten storage. Unfortunately, he found something that no one should ever have to see. Behind the walls, there were decades-old Polaroids, videotapes, all revealing the sexual exploitation of children. What followed would unravel one of the most disturbing cases of generational sexual abuse that our office has ever seen. A case buried for more than 40 years. This is Off the Record.
This special edition of our podcast may contain language and discussion of topics that are not suitable for all viewers.
I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Thien Ho. You're listening to our podcast, Off the Record, where we go beyond the headlines to share real case stories and give you a behind-the-scenes look. We'll dive into public safety topics and explore how our office is working to deliver justice, both in and out of the courtroom. Let's get started.
I'm Katrina Ranum, your host of Off the Record. Today's episode discusses a father and son who engaged in sexual abuse and exploitation of children for decades and decades without being detected. Today's episode is going to unravel how this father and son duo were finally brought to justice after decades of not being detected, and how the victims, despite all odds, finally found their voice and were able to see justice. When the homeowner called the police in 2021, Deputy Keegan received that call. What's interesting about law enforcement and the way they get their calls for service is sometimes they are put on a call. Sometimes they assign themselves to a call. And for reasons that Deputy Keegan might not even be able to fully explain to this day, he assigned himself to that call. And this is a call that he will never forget.
Deputy Keegan, you were on patrol that day, right?
Correct.
And when the call comes in from dispatch, so when someone calls 911 and it gets routed to the officers, do you get assigned to a call or do you put yourself on that call voluntarily?
In this instance, I was already on a call. I saw this call come in and I decided to ask our dispatcher for the specific call.
What did you read on your computer? What information goes to you?
Just the basic information that the caller gives to our comm center. In this case, the caller was notified our dispatch that he had purchased a property, and while he was cleaning out the property, he had broken out a wall and found what he believed to be child pornography.
So you volunteered to take that call, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then when you got to the location, can you just describe and walk us through what you saw, some of the first things that happened?
So when I originally got there, I met with the caller. I could tell that he was visibly upset. When he first started describing it to me, he said he had purchased the house 2 years prior in 2019, and the family that owned it prior to that had lived on the property for about 50 years. It was a much older elderly gentleman and his two sons, and he had notified me that they had already moved to Texas at the time. So what he said was he had been cleaning out the property of all the junk that was left behind, and while he was cleaning in the barn, he had broken out a wall and found two wooden boxes. When he opened the boxes, he pulled out what he believed was child pornography. As soon as he saw what he saw, he called us immediately and left the barn.
The homeowner who bought this old abandoned outhouse on this property was looking for a property that was going to bring tranquility to his life. He had big plans for renovating this outhouse, and those plans came crashing down when he found this box of vile, disgusting sexual exploits that were buried inside the wall. The homeowner can't unsee what he saw that day. And from his decision to make a call to 911 on that one day, in that one split second, he was thrown into a case that lasted 2 or 3 years.
Tell us a little bit about just your involvement in the case and how you came about.
Yeah, we bought the place in 2019, and we started looking at it in the late winter, probably about March, probably about this time of year in 2019. We were looking for a place that we could put 2 houses on, one for my wife and my kids, and one for my wife's mother. And we couldn't really find a place land that we could use to have a small farm. Mm-hmm. We looked at some other places, didn't really find anything that really fit all of that, and or that was something that we could pay for. We knew about this place for a while. We had kind of looked at it for a while. We checked into it. The agent told us that we weren't allowed to look at the property unless we had made some sort of. We told them that we were actually serious about it. Mm-hmm. And that we couldn't go in the house until we had a signed agreement. Signed agreement. Yes. So we didn't even know there was a house on here. We couldn't actually figure it out. It was so covered up in trees that you couldn't see it from the maps, and you couldn't see it from the road at all because that was completely overgrown. The only thing we knew is that there was the barn, you could see, and the shop. You could see those from the road and from the overhead views, but the house was invisible, so we couldn't even tell it was here. So we did make an offer. They finally accepted it, going back and forth a bunch of things like that. We were able to tour the house then. The old man, which was that's what his son called him, by the way. So
the old man.
Yeah, Ted, or was living here with his 2 sons. The one was also living part-time in Texas, Jim, and the other one, Adley, was here all the time. His room was that room back there.
So what actually happened when you found the evidence?
Oh, so there's a long history of finding things here. So you have to understand that once we started cleaning things out, we started with the barn. And we started upstairs, and the barn at that time had a deck. It didn't have stairs upstairs. I put those in. This deck was about ready to fall apart, but what we were able to do is just throw stuff out off the top. Mm-hmm. The upstairs of the barn was basically a collection of porn from like the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, even older. And they apparently were really into making wax and plaster molds and models and things like that. It was just creepy. Mm-hmm. So things like that were everywhere. What I was trying to do is because they were hoarders and that stuff was simply everywhere. All of that just went to the landfill without even looking at it. Mm-hmm. But what I was always trying to do is find something that was older than that predated their time at this property. Mm-hmm. Because this house was built in 1926. They were here for 50 years, so there were people before that, and I was always trying to find pictures and things. So if you go back far enough into what's in the corner, sometimes we did find a few things. I do have a few pictures that we did find. I had the barn mostly cleaned out, actually. They had, that was full. Had pretty much taken everything out. Hadn't really taken the sheetrock off the walls yet, but I started to do that. I pulled the sheetrock off the walls, basically had it cleaned out. There was this one area just above the door as you came in that you couldn't get to. What they had before is they had a ceiling that kind of was down about a foot from the actual top. Mm-hmm. And it came in, and the center of it was open, but there's about 5 or 6 feet between the center of the opening and the actual wall. Mm-hmm. So the area above the door was hidden until you pull all that stuff down, of course.
So when you were going through and cleaning the house,
right,
at one point you found the evidence.
I found that in the barn. Yes.
And kind of walk us through what you found that day. So
that looked like it looked like just some wood that was nailed up just above the door. Mm-hmm. And I was at lunch, whatever, and I was trying to I wonder what that is. I should pull that down and see what it actually is. Maybe there's something hidden up there. It'd be kind of fun to see. And so then I pulled it down. It was this little wooden box. It was nailed up there.
So you wondered what was up there.
Yeah.
You thought it was a wooden box. You took it down, and then Walk us through what happened then.
I opened it up and I saw pictures, which is different than normal, because normally the stuff was disgusting, to be sure. Those plaster wax things, which are so these were actual pictures,
Photographs.
Polaroids.
Polaroids.
Right.
So there were Polaroids.
Yes.
What did you see on the Polaroids that caught your attention?
Oh, I saw, I didn't have to get very far through them and saw that, she looks awfully young. And then I turned it over and she said age 9, and they had their names on there.
And these were child pornography.
It was obvious right away.
And
There was the actual acts going on,
acts going on, sexual acts being
Yes.
committed upon children.
Yeah.
And so when you saw that, what kind of went through your mind at that moment?
I first reaction was, what have I got myself into? It was like, oh no, I knew these people were disgusting, but perhaps this is a lot more than I thought it was going to be.
It must have been pretty shocking when you opened up and you saw it, and you realized that these horrible things had happened to children here.
I knew they were disgusting people. I just didn't know that it crossed that line.
You didn't
couldn't
know-
prove it.
You didn't know the extent of their depravity
Right.
and how far they had descended into darkness and what they did to children. So, walking around here, you get a sense of what was here before. Is that when you then called the police? And
Yeah. Once I found that, I saw that she looked awfully young, and then there was an age on the back. I think it was 9 or something like that. Like, oh no, well, I have to call the police. I can't not report this.
Theodore Smith started abusing these children in 1988. James Smith, his son, started abusing these same children shortly thereafter in 1993, and then again in 2010. These children were under 5 when this abuse started, and it continued for over a decade. Over a decade of being sexually abused by these 2 men and not saying a word to anyone about it, ever. And that was probably their plan, to continue it that way. When officers first became aware about this case, when that homeowner made the decision to make that first call, child abuse detectives were assigned to this case. One of the really intriguing parts about this case is that when this case actually came out and was being investigated by the Sacramento Sheriff's Office, it was assigned to the child abuse unit. At the time, my husband actually was on the child abuse team. His name is Robert Ranum, and he was working this case. So I was not involved at all in a prosecutorial capacity. I wasn't handling the case at all, but I remember hearing about this case when it came out at home because my husband would tell me about it. And I knew that he was involved in some of the investigation and had played a role in this case. Now that we are covering this case as a podcast, we can actually have him fill in the information for us about what his particular role was and what involvement he had in it. He's here with us today. Hi.
Hey.
One of the questions that I have is, what exactly was your role assigned? What were you assigned to do in this case?
Yeah, so when this case came out, there was a lot of evidence to go through right away. The deputy on scene had brought VHS tapes, a lot of Polaroid cameras, and each one of them had to be meticulously gone through. I was assigned with reviewing one of the VHSs. That VHS seemed to be like a compilation of all the other VHSs that we located. So I had all the videos that were seen on the other VHSs, and my job was to go through that VHS in great detail, documenting crimes and evidence that I could see or hear within the video.
And what did you find that ended up being very important in this case?
Well, so as I was going through the video, the investigation was continuing with other detectives taking the lead on that, and they had identified suspects, and the suspects were not in California, they were in Texas. So there was a decision at some point that we were going out to Texas to serve search warrants, to speak with people, and likely make an arrest. So in preparing for that trip to Texas, I went through all the Polaroids which had been gone through by other detectives and documented as evidence. But I went through them looking in the background for certain objects that were identifiable enough to possibly be seized during these search warrants. It had been, decades, but some of this stuff I thought might have still been, part of at the property or in the possession of these individuals.
It could have still been around.
Yeah. So through that, I identified about 34 images or items, and those items were all, like I said, had enough detail where I might be able to identify them, but some were kind of bar stools that had like an ornate design on them. Are there more than one? Sure. Mm-hmm. But the reality of finding the same one in these videos or in these photographs 4 decades later out in Texas would, I think, tell part of the story that we wanted to tell. And in doing that, one of the things I noticed is that in the video that I was in charge of documenting, as well as 9 other Polaroid photographs, was a belt buckle that Theodore was wearing. When I saw the belt buckle, it looked to be silver. It was in a rectangular shape, but the edges of the belt buckle were rounded. And I noticed that there was a design on the belt buckle. I didn't know what it was, but it appeared to start in the upper left-hand corner, or in one of the corners, and at a point it got a little thicker, and it came down to another point in a diagonal. Now, during that search warrant, we found that belt buckle.
What was the significance of the belt buckle?
Yeah, so the belt buckle I noticed was in 9 of the Polaroid photographs, and it was on Theodore as he was
committing the crimes.
Yeah, and then in the video that I watched, like I said, it was a video of multiple crimes over multiple years in multiple locations, and I recognized, one of those locations as the barn where the initial call for service was created. But there was also other locations in that video as well.
Is it because at the barn, if you recall, the barn or the property has a house, right?
Correct.
Detached, but those are all on this big, huge property. Were the crimes committed in both the house and the barn?
For sure the barn, and it did appear based off of the videos I watched. There was one video where the victim was wearing a certain outfit, and she was in the barn, and I knew where that barn was. And then she was wearing the same outfit in a bedroom that wasn't in the barn. So I assumed that would have been the main house. But in that video, there was, like I said, multiple videos. We just talked about a video in the barn, and there was also a video that I believed was in that house due to the victim wearing the same clothing. Maybe the same crime happened that day or the next day. But in those videos, Theodore was wearing this belt buckle. I could hear it. It got removed. I could see it. And we found that belt buckle in Texas.
Where did you went to Texas? I remember that.
Yes.
You were gone for a few days in Texas.
Correct.
Did you find it, or was there a team there that you were directing? Hey, look for this particular piece of evidence.
No, as I said earlier, there was 34 items that I thought, hey, let's try to find these items while we were out there. And I briefed the team that was out there and notified about this. And actually, our supervisor, our sergeant at the time, he came up to me. He's like, hey, I think I found the belt buckle. He showed it to me, and I had looked at that belt buckle. I printed out photos. I cropped photos to get close-ups of it. And as soon as I saw it, I knew he was right. That was the belt buckle that I saw in those videos and those Polaroid photographs. Yeah.
So crazy that many years later, because at this point we're talking decades and decades after it's worn in that Polaroid photo, right?
Yeah.
Was there any other pieces of evidence like similar to this that were found in Texas?
Yeah, we had in the barn, I was watching one of the crimes occur, and I noticed in the rafters there's a large airplane. It's like a model airplane, but larger than a normal model airplane, kind of a unique thing. Well, when we were out in Texas, I observed that hanging in the kind of barn equivalent that was out there. It was like a storage container, and it was hanging there, and I noticed that, and we photographed that. There was one of the crimes happened on it was a pink blanket with a floral design, and we did find that blanket with the same floral design. It was the exact same blanket, and then
These guys didn't get rid of anything.
yeah, they
Clearly.
just packed up everything and took it all to Texas. Out of those 34 items that I was looking for, that I believed had a chance of being found, 28 of them we were able to find out there.
When we think about sexual abuse, we don't ever really think about it in the context of this magnitude of abuse. Can you imagine being in that house, in those walls, in that environment, and being molested by two different men repeatedly for a decade of your life, and then not feeling that you had the ability to tell anyone? These victims were well into adulthood when law enforcement reached out to them one day and said, "We think we know who you are, and we think we know what happened to you."
Detective Ruben Pena and Sergeant Melanie Moreno are here from the Sacramento Sheriff's Office. You two worked on this case, right?
We did, yes.
Yes.
Why don't we just start with how you even identified the victims in this case? Because when we talked with Deputy Keegan, he told us that there was two pieces of main evidence that he had. He's got some Polaroid photos with identifying names on it and some date of births and dates on it and a couple other writings on it. And he also saw an inscription in the barn: Sarah the Boo, Kimberly 2, Jane makes 3.
Yes.
What else did you have?
At that point, that's really all that we had. We did have, Deputy Keegan had interviewed the current homeowner, the new homeowner, and we did know that the previous owner was a Theodore Smith. So we knew that, and that owner knew that Theodore had a wife and some children, and he was able to name off a couple of the names. So that's basically all we had at that time. And so then we just went from there, and Smith being a very common name, was pretty difficult. We were able to find within the sheriff's office reports with a Theodore Smith where he was a suspect in a couple of child molest cases way back in the 70s. So we kind of started there.
Let's talk more about that. So Theodore Smith is the dad, right?
Yes.
And the co-defendant in this case, or the other defendant, is James Smith, or Jim Smith, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is father and son who are molesting all of these kids for decades and decades and decades. You said that Theodore Smith actually has a criminal history for child molest, is that right?
Yes, it was my understanding at that time it was incest, because this was 1972, so the codes may have been a little bit different at that time, the penal codes.
Right.
So for incest and for rape. But we didn't know whatever happened with those because those records were not available to us then at the time.
So we know he had an arrest then.
Right.
There was an arrest back in 1972 for incest, and I think it was actually statutory rape.
Yes.
Okay, so he has those two, and we don't, unclear whether it resulted in a conviction?
Yes,
Okay.
we didn't know at that time. And so we just had that information, so we kind of had an idea of who he was, but we still didn't know who the victims were that were named on the Polaroid and then how they matched with the stamped concrete. And so there was a series of going through law enforcement databases, as well as then connecting through some genealogy websites, and even at one point the sheriff's office cropped the faces on the Polaroids just to show their faces and put it on our social media page to say, hey, does anybody know who these two girls are?
Did you get any hits or responses from that?
Not yet, not at that time, no. And so then finally, then we were able to identify who the two primary victims were, and we did the same thing with them, and they, with showing them the pictures, and they said, yes, that's us.
Was that, how was that initial, if you recall, how was the initial reaction of going to the true victims and saying, hey, is this you from decades ago? We found information. Were you molested or were you sexually assaulted? And is this you in these Polaroids? Tell us about that discussion.
Well, when I talked to the victims, they had no intention of ever saying anything to anybody about the molest. It was just her and the other victim, that they would talk amongst each other about it, but nobody else knew about it. It was something that they said that they were going to keep it a secret because they were related to Theodore, that they did not want to break up the family, which is huge for a lot of kids who are molested, and so they kept it quiet.
What's interesting about this, though, is these girls were molested back in the 80s and 90s, so when you're talking to them, they're adults, right?
Yes.
And they still were worried about breaking up the family.
They were, to a degree. They were finally, it was almost like the idea of they had kept this a secret for so long, and they had not had contact with Theodore for several years, and they realized, because they didn't know that there was going to be any type of evidence still of anything, and knowing that there was evidence, they were finally like at a place, because they are adults, and to be able to say, hey, yes, this did happen, and he needs to have some kind of consequence for doing the horrific things that he did to us.
The detectives tracked both James and Theodore Smith all the way to Texas, where they were now living at the time that the case was being investigated. When law enforcement arrived to Texas, Theodore Smith was 90 years old, and James Smith was 66 years old.
Detective Pena, a couple questions that I want to ask that relate now to James and Theodore Smith. I want to know about how they were actually caught.
So once we were able to identify them, we had to go through, first of all the Polaroids and the video cassettes that were located and catalog.
From at the barn, the ones that were located. Okay,
Correct.
Tell me about that, actually. Let's start there. How did that process happen, and how long and how laborsome was that?
So it was very laborsome. We had to divide the work amongst several people within our unit, and it's a lot more than just looking at a photograph. We're looking at photographs. We're also taking note about things that might be in the background, details that we might later be looking for, maybe in the service of a search warrant, but also specifically we're looking at acts. So when we're looking at the Polaroids, trying to hopefully get an understanding of what age the children are, watching the videos and watching the acts actually happen in real time, it's important and difficult, obviously. We're looking at very graphic and disturbing events to detail each individual act, because that it is important when we're bringing the case forward now to the district attorney's office and how they're going to charge these crimes.
Were you actually there to execute the search warrant and try and find this evidence?
I was.
Okay. What, describe what that was like. Were they living on another, first of all, were James and Teddy both there?
Only Teddy was there. James, we later found out, was actually on his way back to California when we served the search warrant to pick up some more property that he had left at a friend's house during the move. But Theodore, Teddy, was there.
And what was that property like?
It was surreal. So the area in Texas, Alto, Texas, is very rural, and we, again, huge shout out to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. Before we were serving the search warrant, they started surveilling the property for days in advance to find out what the common occurrences were of the family, knowing that we were going to be serving the search warrant. So they knew at a certain time, kids that were living on the property at the time were being taken to school.
They had kids living on the property?
Yes.
With Theodore?
Yes. So we knew that this was happening. We knew that at a certain time they always left to go to school. At another time, other people on the property would leave. So it was a coordinated effort. As people were leaving the property, deputies were pulling them over and detaining them, as other deputies were going into the property, detaining the people that were on the property so that the search warrant can be served. And this is a huge property. We're talking a main house, several outbuildings, connexes. The property was several acres large. So it took a while to go through the property and search everything.
And at this point, you have this list of items you're looking for, right?
Yes.
Because you've cataloged these different photos and videos, and you knew you were trying to find a couple dozen main objects that would corroborate some of the information in those photos and videos, right?
Yes.
Okay. What did you find?
So during the service of the search warrant, we found several of those items. We found, for example, the belt buckle. We found model airplanes, heavy machinery used in workshops that we could match back to these photographs that we had cataloged in videos. Another big shout out to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. I forgot to mention this. They had forensic interviewers on standby for us because we knew there were children living on that property with Theodore. So we literally went from pulling these vehicles over, these kids going to school, and transporting these kids to be interviewed by forensic interviewers in Texas.
Were those kids molested?
Nobody disclosed anything, and I don't know if that was because that was actually what happened. Theodore was very, very elderly by the time we had gone out there. He was bound to a wheelchair.
How old was he?
He was in his mid-80s. I think he was 86, 87 years old by the time we made contact with him and arrested him.
What was his reaction to when you, at some point, you're going to tell him, we're here for molesting that you did decades ago? What was his reaction, if anything?
So, Theodore's reaction was very calm. Actually, he acted like he had no idea what was going on. And initially, when we started asking him questions, asking him why he thinks we would be out there, he just kept saying he had no idea. We started presenting evidence slowly to see if it would refresh his recollection, or more just confronting him with things that we knew. For example, cutouts of the photographs and the videos of the victims and himself, to where we asked him flat out if he would be surprised if there was any evidence of him sexually abusing any children. And initially he denied it, until we actually showed him these portions of the Polaroids, asking, like a portion of the Polaroid, for example, with just his face, where it's hard to deny,
right,
this is me.
Right.
So we, who is this? And he would say, well, that's me. And then we started showing him portions of the other people, and then we put them together. And then once he kind of figured the gig was up, he was like, okay, you caught me. Yeah, I did that. And he was
all of it for years, multiple victims for years.
Yes, he was very unapologetic once he was presented with the gravity of the evidence against him. And it's
what stands out to you most about what he said?
You don't deal with people like Theodore that are unapologetic. Usually when you're talking to these suspects and they're faced with the gravity, there is a sense of shame, and there is a sense of almost disgust within themselves for the things that have happened. With Theodore, that was not like that at all. He readily admitted to being a pedophile. He further stated that he thought the victims enjoyed what he was doing, and he didn't really see anything wrong with the acts that occurred. He made it very clear that, hey, they seem to enjoy what I was doing to them. I guess you would call me a pedophile.
He said that.
Yes, but he did not seem remorseful. He did not seem like he thought there was anything wrong with what he was doing.
So one of the interesting things about this case was that this case was affected by the statute of limitations. This case came to law enforcement's attention nearly 30 years after some of the events had occurred. Some of the events actually occurred almost 40 years back. And when law enforcement was provided this case, the information from the homeowners finding the materials, we had to look and see whether the statute of limitations could be met. A statute of limitations is a bar that stops us from filing cases after it's been too long. A normal statute of limitations on a case may be 3 years for something like vehicle theft, robbery. But in the area of child sexual assault, there's a large variable. And so one of the really great takeaways of this case is that the statute of limitations is very flexible and allows us to reach back a long ways.
Now, what's tricky about this case is that these crimes spanned decades and decades, and therefore put us back into the 1980s when these assaults on these children started. Theodore Smith was charged with numerous forcible sex acts on different children. He was also charged or alleged to have several factors in aggravation that were associated with these forcible sex acts. What that means in plain language is that there are a number of really bad factors associated with the crimes he committed, as if the crimes that he committed himself isn't bad enough. There's other factors that elevate the magnitude of the crimes. And the people, the DA's office, allege those factors so that a judge can give a higher sentence. So Theodore Smith had those numerous forcible sex acts plus factors in aggravation. James Smith was charged with lewd act on a child, on children, as well as child pornography. Together, their sentence equated to 123 years in state prison. Theodore Smith was convicted of numerous counts, and he was sentenced to 100 years in state prison. James Smith was sentenced to 23 years to life in state prison. This case is a perfect example on why we need people to report crimes. I guarantee that there is someone out there listening to this episode thinking, I didn't know that I could report a crime that happened to me back in the 80s or 90s. And that's why we wanted to publish this particular episode, because we need the community to know, report, report, report. We cannot prosecute crimes that we don't know occurred. In this case, these victims incurred decades of abuse, decades of concealed betrayals against numerous victims. And but for one homeowner doing the right thing on one day in one split second, this case would have never been prosecuted. Thankfully, that particular homeowner reported what he knew was a horrible crime, and the end result is that justice was able to be served. Did the wheels of justice turn slow in this case? Yes. Slower than we would have liked for those victims. But justice caught up with James and Theodore nonetheless, and now they are doing life in prison for what they did to those victims in the 80s and 90s. If you or anyone you know has been sexually abused at some point in your life, take that first step and report it. We can't prosecute crimes that we don't know about.
If you or someone you know has been a victim of abuse or sexual assault, help is available. Visit our website to connect with support and resources today. It's never too late.
You've been listening to Off the Record. I hope this episode encourages you to stay informed and inspired. Follow us on social media for updates and behind-the-scenes content from our office. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time for more stories that matter.